Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this live stream presentation with the Los Alamos Mountaineers. This virtual event is being brought to you by the Pajarito Environmental Education Center, or PEEC, which operates the Los Alamos Nature Center. I am Beth Courtwright, the Operations Manager for PEEC, and I will be moderating tonight's meeting. Before the meeting gets started, I'd like to share with you PEEC's Land Acknowledgement Statement. As a community of nature lovers and educators, it is our responsibility to learn about the history of the land on which we live, work, and play. We'd like to take this time to acknowledge that the Los Alamos Nature Center sits on unceded indigenous land. This area was home to ancestral Pueblo populations, including peoples that spoke the Tewa, Toa, and Carries languages. This area also holds an ancestral significance through trade and migration to the Athabascan-speaking peoples, including the Dinétah and Apache. We acknowledge the Tanoan, Karasan, and Athabascan speaking peoples, their elders, future generations, and their past, present, and future ties to this land. We commit to learning more about the ongoing legacy of settler colonialism in the Pajarito Plateau and incorporating our learnings into PEEC's educational offerings for the public. We welcome dialogue and will continue building connections with Indigenous peoples and local Pueblo communities. We invite you to take the time to learn more about these communities and their histories through this list of resources on our website at peeknature.org and by visiting the All Pueblo Council of Governors at apcg.org. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks again for tuning in. I'll now pass it over to Clarissa to start the Mountaineers meeting.
Hi, thank you, Beth. So for our March meeting, we are going to have introduction and announcements, a bylaws vote, before we get to the fun stuff, the trip report and new trips, and the main presentation. So tonight's announcements, there is the spring blowout cleanup in April. So all next month, and we can do trash pickup in Los Alamos County on your own. So get a picture of your 2 bags of cleanup and submit it to the LAM board to win your selection of available Los Alamos Mountaineer stuff. I saw the email, there's a lot of good stuff in there, like t-shirts and whatnot. So definitely get out and pick up some trash in April. Also, we would like to invite people to suggest what types of community club gear we should invest for in the future for Los Alamos Mountaineers trips. Currently, we're building canyoneering gear for Los Alamos trips, and this is community equipment like ropes and whatnot. And this is sort of another reminder that the club is moving towards only having gear borrowed, sorry about the cat, only having gear borrowed for Los Alamos Mountaineer trips. So next, we'll talk about bylaws. Again, the board has been working to redo the bylaws, which were quite outdated based on what sort of activities the trip, the Mountaineers currently do. I've been sending multiple updates to the bylaws out. You should have seen an update come around 2 o'clock today. So the email from 2 o'clock is the one that this motion will be for. So in the emails, they've detailed the differences in the bylaws. I've sent both a redlined version and a air quote final version that's cleaned up for you to read if you don't want to read through all the redlining. And so with that, the motion is made by me, the secretary. It was seconded by Bill Podorski. And then Beth is actually going to open up a vote. This vote is for the Los Alamos Mountaineers members only that are on the call. And I will read it as she sends it out. The proposed amendments to the Constitution and bylaws of the Los Alamos Mountaineers Club shall be posted on the LAM website and emailed to all members so that the final vote can occur at the April membership meeting. This is the first step of 2 as required in the current Constitution and bylaws to make amendments to those. So please go ahead and vote, and we will leave that open for a minute or 2. Not totally sure how long. That seemed like a minute, and it seems like boats have stopped coming in. So apparently we only have 9. I didn't get to vote, not 10 people, I guess, for approve. So I
So
will go
Clarissa,
ahead.
it seems like
Go ahead.
someone may have ended our poll. The poll was
Oh.
ended and I did not do that. So I can see if I
Oh.
can relaunch,
Maybe.
relaunch the
'Cause,
poll.
yeah, we only had, it says 9 of 38 people. There we go.
So we can try one more time. Sorry about
There we
that.
go. Everybody, please revote. Thank you. Yeah, 9 did not seem like enough people. Okay, so that seems like votes have started, or votes have stopped rolling in. So I think we can end the poll. Can you share that? Or should I read off what the?
Those should be the shared results. Can you see
Okay.
those?
I can see them. I hope everyone else can. So 14 approve, 1 disapprove, and 2 abstain. So I believe it was a majority of the votes. So these bylaws, I will post them to the website and send another email with the link to the posting and the bylaws again as attachments. And then we will have our final vote at the April meeting. And we're not making changes in the meantime so that everybody really does have time to read them in full. So thank you all. Now I think with that, we can move on to the fun part, not the business part. So I'm going to turn it over to Tony to start the trip report and talk about new trips.
Okay. So just to let everyone know, Bill Podorski put these slides together, and what I'm going to do is overview the Mountaineers adventures since the February meeting, both club trips and private. Okay, so the first one is, I believe, a club trip that was led by Jean Dewart. It was 8 miles cross-country ski at the Sargent's Wildlife area north of Chama. They had intended to ski to Jawbone Mountain, but the highway was closed after a snowstorm. Next slide. So beautiful terrain. It looks like really great snow. Looks like a great trip. And here are all the folks with their names up there. Looks like a happy crew. Next slide. And I guess they saw a balloon driving on the way home, which is kind of interesting. The next trip was a backpack by Stuart Trugman. It was actually a solo 3-day, 2-night backpack on the Little Bear Canyon of the Middle Fork of the Gila. This picture is a sunrise from his camp at the confluence of Little Bear Canyon and the Middle Fork. Next slide. This is a hot springs that was 7 miles in that he was able to hike to and then enjoy in solitude. Next slide. And these are some of the cliffs, very interesting cliffs on the Middle Fork. So this is a very unpopulated area, very remote, and I think not visited by folks, but worth a visit. Next slide, please. Ron Morgan and Michael Altier went ice climbing in Ouray. Next slide. And the club actually contributed to support reconstruction of the schoolroom catwalk when it was destroyed, I think last year. The construction continues, but really good climbing. And I think, is this a picture of Ron? I'm not sure. Also, the Ouray Via Ferrata continues to expand and is a nice adding, perhaps in less frigid times. Next slide. Joy Green with a group of folks did the Knife Edge Trail to Montrose Peak with Montrose Peak in the background. This was Wednesday, March 16th, and Jean Dewart was also on this hike. Next slide. There was a private hut trip to the Sisters Cabin in Colorado, led by Kathleen Grutzemacher. This was 14 people who went uphill pretty steeply, as you can see from the topo map there, or the elevation map. Next slide. You can see Kathleen with her snowshoes. Patty Walls and Jeff Flick went hiking on Kauai. They look very happy, very warm. This is Waimea Canyon in Kauai that they were able to view. Next slide. And the Kilauea crater erupting on the Big Island. Neat. So upcoming trips, there's a new trip for canyon hiking on Cone Ridge in the White Canyon area, April 13th through 17th. This is will be led by Bill Prydorski. You'll be based in Blanding, Utah. And there's one spot left on this trip. Gorgeous views. And then there are a couple of new trips coming up. Technical canyoneering practice in Pajarito Canyon and White Rock on Sunday, March 27th. Contact Melanie Han, who's organizing this. This will be a really nice canyoneering canyon and local. And we'll be using some of our new canyoneering gear, hopefully. And then Bill Prydorski will be announcing his Moab hike bike canyoneering trip that will be in November 5th through 13th, 2022. That's going to be announced soon. Okay, I think that's all. So let's go on to Rod.
Tonight's speaker was suggested by Jean Dewart, and she just knows this subject matter and pays attention to it. So she suggested Julian Ross to speak, provided me with contact information. I got a hold of him, and here he is to speak. So he's going to say quite a bit about himself and what he does. So I'm not going to steal his thunder. He's a Santa Fe native, really got into weather as a kid due to a neighbor who got him excited about tornadoes. I'm not sure she intended to do that, but so be it. So he studied meteorology in college, got a job, and he's also quite passionate about skiing. So combining those two, he works for Open Snow. He's also into fishing, backpacking, surfing, so plenty of outdoor adventure sports. So without further ado, here's Julian Ross.
Thank you so much, Rob. Thank you, Beth. Beth, can you hear me okay? Loud and clear?
Yep, loud and clear. Sounds good.
Great. Well, thank you for that introduction, and I'm just really thrilled to be with you all. Tonight, we're going to talk about predicting powder and the science of snow in New Mexico. And again, I'm Julian Ross, and that's a picture of me from last weekend. Kuchara was on my bucket list for many, many years, and I finally went to Kuchara. And actually, if we have some time at the end, I'd love to hear from anyone of you who've been there or who love it. There's actually an effort to reboot the ski mountain there. And I'd love to actually spend a few minutes talking about that with you all as other lovers of mountains and the Sangre de Cristos. I fell in love with weather and skiing at age 7. I was born and raised in Santa Fe. And as Rob said, kind of an adopted grandma, a neighbor of mine, babysat for me while my mom and dad were working. Florence, she had come from Missouri to get away from tornadoes. And she would tell me stories about tornadoes approaching the mobile home park. And, you know, she showed me a book, and man, I couldn't stop thinking about storms and tornadoes. And then luckily at Carlos Gilbert here in Santa Fe, they had a program where they subsidized trips up to ski, what was the Santa Fe ski basin, now Ski Santa Fe. My parents were city slickers from New York and never picked up a ski anything. And so thankfully this subsidized program, I learned how to ski at age 7. And I learned at Santa Fe and Taos. I later discovered the gem that is Pajarito. But I learned how to ski at Santa Fe and Taos. And you know, my love of storms and weather, in college, I went to Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, and I got a degree in physical geography, but I took every course that they had on meteorology and weather. It's funny, I did an internship at the National Weather Service in Flagstaff because I thought maybe that's what I would want to do as my career. And I was like, you know, you get to be outside, you get to be out looking at the clouds. And little did I know, actually, most meteorologists spend the majority of their time behind a computer. And so actually at the age of 20, after that internship, I said, I don't think I want to go into meteorology as a career. So I went into a different track. I'm a consultant now for nonprofit organizations, and I used to run a nonprofit in Colorado for many years, and in Austin, Texas. So the two things I'm really good at, I'm a waiter of 10 years growing up in Santa Fe at restaurants, and then I've been a nonprofit manager and consultant for about 20 years. But throughout that time, I've always followed weather and storms, and I get out and ski. And when I lived in Colorado, I chased powder. I mean, that's my most avid hobby. And so I started reading OpenSnow as a user when I lived in Colorado, started in 2009. And for 9 years, I was a reader. And then I reached out to Joel Gratz, the CEO, when they were kind of launching a New Mexico forecaster. And I said, hey, if you ever need someone, I'm from New Mexico. And the stars lined up in 2019. They were finally ready to hire someone. And so it's really been a dream of mine. OpenSnow reaches 3 million people worldwide, and we have tens of thousands that read the New Mexico Daily Snow, which is what I do. From November to April, I write 4 or 5 posts a week. And when there's storms, obviously, every day. So tonight, what we're going to talk about, and I'm going to try to leave plenty of time for discussion and questions, because that's the most fun part for me, and I learn a lot from you all as well. We're going to jump right in. We're going to talk about La Nina and the season snowpack update. How did we do last year? How are we doing this year? We're going to do a 3-week forecast. So I'm going to actually kind of walk you through how I forecast snow, and we can kind of look at real time, because we still have winter kind of hanging on. Forecasting in New Mexico specifically, the mountains that we all love. How do we approach that? And then questions and discussion. I just want to pause real quick. Beth, are you still hearing me okay? And you're seeing my screen okay?
Yep, everything looks and sounds good.
Okay, great. And again, please, you can send your questions to Beth via chat, or we're going to open it up. And Beth, I'm fine with questions in real time. So if you want to interrupt me, please do. So real quick, OpenSnow. I'd love to do a quick poll to see how many of you use it or know it. But basically, it's an app and a website. And many of you will also love the summer version, which is Open Summit, which I use. I go backpacking all the time. I like to hike peaks, and so I'm very afraid of lightning. And so the Open Summit has the summer version is great for tracking storms in the summer. OpenSnow is our winter version. And we are a subscription model now, and we can talk about that at the end. But boy, if you love snow or you love summer hiking, to me it's a no-brainer. I mean, I was a subscriber for 10 years. I think it's like $29 for one subscription, or you could do a family deal where it's like $40 for 4 users. But it's got so many bells and whistles, really cool maps. If you like to geek out and kind of track radar, track temperature, wind, how much it snowed, how much it's going to snow. I mean, this is like, it's really not just, I would say, for skiers. I mean, if you just are a winter enthusiast, you'll really love it. Like you, I love New Mexico. I mean, I am so passionate about what I do, and the reason is because I appreciate Beth, lifting up the kind of spiritual, our ancestors that were here before many of us, and but to me, my church are the mountains, and I'm very spiritual with the mountains. And I was up at Pajarito last month, and I just took in. I sat there and I said, "Wow!" I mean, I can see every mountain that I love. I'm standing on one in the Jemez, and then I could look at. You could see a vantage point there where you can see all of our Sangre de Cristo ski resorts or backcountry destinations, if that's your thing, or backpacking in the summer up in the Truchas. And so to me, to be able to write about the snow in these mountains that I love is really a dream. So let's get into the science of it a little bit. as you all know, and I've probably read, we are in what's called a double dip La Nina, meaning we're in the second consecutive year of 2 La Ninas in a row. So what does that mean? You know, and when I was growing up, I remember, for some reason, I remember 1984, a powder day up in Ski Santa Fe. I mean, I was 9 years old. And I remember it, I was like, oh, that, and I actually went back and looked, was that an El Nino year, you know? But here in New Mexico, it really has huge consequences. I mean, there's some places in the country where El Nino and La Nina is like, kind of a wash. But for New Mexico, it really does have substantial impacts. And I would say in particular, the more southern you get in the state. But basically, La Nina is when you have abnormal cooling of the ocean, kind of west of the Galapagos Islands. And you can see, you know, that kind of strip of blue there. That's just an example from December 1988. But if you looked at this year or last year,
So Julian,
uh-huh.
1 second, we're still on your intro slide. I don't know if you have it paused, or it doesn't look like we're seeing what you're.
Oh no, how about now? Yeah, so this is a great view that I'm sure you've all seen from Pajarito. And I just was like, wow, you can see every Sangre de Cristo resort, plus many places that we go backpacking in the Sangres. Yeah, next slide. And everyone's seeing this okay, I presume? Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing it as a full screen, but I see it pretty well, so we can keep going. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, I just saw a chat that said yes.
Okay. So these are the setups for La Nina and El Nino. Basically, the top map shows the cooling, that blue line that's kind of to the west of the Galapagos Islands in South America. It's a abnormal cooling of the ocean water there, and that has huge implications for all the weather patterns in the entire northern hemisphere. And without getting into the whole kind of nuanced science of it, the El Nino is the reverse of that, which is where you have an abnormal warming. A neutral would be where the waters there are just kind of normal temperature, and that's kind of what's called an ENSO neutral. And El Nino is when it's a warmer than normal. La Nina is colder than normal, kind of just the basic. And the last 2 years, so the 2021 season and the 21-22 season, we've been in a back-to-back, what we call a double dip La Nina. And you can go to the next slide. The top chart here is the kind of common winter pattern in a La Nina, where you have because of the cold waters off the coast of South America, you get a high pressure that forms just south of Alaska. And what that does is it forces the jet stream and the storm track to the north. You do get a dipping kind of storm track that drives down across the Pacific Northwest, across Wyoming and Colorado, and then kind of back up into the Northeast. And you can see that in that La Nina, New Mexico typically, over many, many years, typically is drier than normal. But as we'll talk in a minute, we're not that far from that storm track. As you know, you can see that storm track does come near us. And so there's a lot of variability, and it's very nuanced. The El Nino pattern on the bottom, it's the opposite. You get a low pressure that forms below Alaska. And that forces the jet stream and the storm track more south. And that's when you get a wetter than normal, typically in the desert Southwest. And that's when we can see some very big snow years here in New Mexico. Go next slide, please. This is a graph that shows, and I should back up a little bit. There are variation. There's kind of a range of La Nina and El Nino. You can have a very strong La Nina, you can have a moderate La Nina, and you can have kind of a weak La Nina. Same with El Nino, and that's just how cold, how abnormally cold is the ocean temperature. And the last 2 years, it just so happens we've had what's been determined a moderate La Nina. So it hasn't been real strong and hasn't been real weak. Brian Brettschneider, who's a climatologist out of Alaska, I love to follow him. And if you like climatology, you should definitely follow Brian Brettschneider. He looked at every moderate La Nina going back to 1903 or early 1900s, and there was 15 or 16 years where it was a moderate La Nina, like 2021, like 21-22, and he looked at what's the departure from the normal winter precipitation, and in other words, in those moderate La Nina years, when you add it all up, which counties got more or less precipitation than average, and they calculate that average over the span of 100+ years. And if you look at this map, you'll see that the kind of green, the flow of green is consistent with that track we talked about in La Nina that swoops down from the Pacific Northwest across Wyoming and Colorado and then back up into the Northeast. So it's not surprising that you see kind of that green bow arcing like that. What I love about this, and it actually really helped us prepare for the last 2 seasons, is when you zoom into New Mexico. Go ahead to the next slide, please. When you zoom into New Mexico, we see that the Sangre de Cristos, the northern Sangre de Cristos, Cuchara that I just mentioned, up into the San Luis Valley, the range that goes up from Alamosa, Mount Blanca, Taos Ski Valley, Red River. In these moderate La Nina years, actually performed 100 to 110% of average, meaning it's not uncommon, and in fact, it's common for the northern Sangre de Cristos to be at or above average snowpack in a moderate La Nina. So we can't just say, oh, La Nina, the season's a wash. No. But what's really striking is that the further south you get, it really does drop off precipitously. And in New Mexico, that really means the southern mountains around Ski Apache, the Sacramento Mountains have really, really suffered. I mean, I'm talking grave. Cannot sustain multiple La Ninas in a row. Interestingly, the southern Sangre de Cristos around Ski Santa Fe, Sipapu, the Jemez, you'll see also drop off in the 80 to 90%, 70 to 80%. And so when we talk about La Nina, it's very nuanced for New Mexico. Let's go to the next slide. This is looking at last season's snowpack. So this is what we call snow water equivalent. We have Snotel sites around the country and around all mountains that get snow. And it's, the federal government invests in these Snotel sites. They're sensors that are up in the middle of the mountains that measure snowpack. And it's funded really for agricultural interests, so that farms and agriculture can, anticipate what the river runoff is going to be. But it's also very useful for snow forecasting, understanding skiing and mountaineering. We also use Snotel Data. And so there are some sites in and around the Jemez, as you know. And this gives us a snapshot of snowpack so last year, you all remember, we had some storms in February, March that kind of saved the season at Pajarito. I mean, it looked like Pajarito wasn't even going to open. And then we got a couple big storms. By March 26th, we were at 64% of normal. In the Jemez there, and we were in not great shape, but not horrible shape in the northern mountains. And look at the southern mountains around the Sacramentos and Ski Apache. Very consistent. That March 26th slide there, if you go back up real quick, Beth, to the previous slide. Look at that. It's unbelievable how on March 26th last year, it echoes that almost exactly. 100, near normal, northern Sangres, 60 to 80, Jemez, southern Sangres, and then drops off. Go to the next slide. To just like, 6% of normal down at Ski Apache. And then what happened? If you were here last year, remember, it just got really warm. And by April 19th, look at the snowpack, just got eviscerated. Last year in early April, eviscerated even in the Sangres. Let's look at this year. Let's go to the next slide. So this was taken today on March 22nd. Fascinating. And I didn't have time to put a comparison from like a month or two ago, but it's a month or two ago, the Jemez were in the oranges, maybe reds even. Again, it didn't look like Pajarito was going to open maybe. And then we had a couple good storms. And the Jemez, at least on the Snotel sites, we're at above normal preset. Southern Sangres, I know around Ski Santa Fe, I was just there yesterday, are hurting, good skiing, but the snowpack's very bare on the south facing slope, 70%. And then Southern Mountains at 43, 3 days ago that they were at 5%. So we just had this southern storm that gave it a little boost. So we can't just conclude that La Nina is a wash in New Mexico. It's way more nuanced than that. And that's good news. For this year, at least right now, we're looking pretty good. And we're going to do our 3-week forecast here in a minute. We can see, are we going to get eviscerated again going into April or not? Let me just pause, Beth, and see if anyone's chatted in a question. I'm just going to get a drink of water.
Just one quick question about your skin or your trip up to Cuchara.
Cuchara, yeah.
Cuchara, sorry. Sylvie wants to know if you can skin up Rio Costilla like you did for Cuchara.
That's a question I have for you all. I talked to 2 friends who said yes, but I haven't verified it, and I need to do more research. So if anyone knows the answer, but I have a little bit of a fascination with the ghost resorts for sure after going to Cuchara.
And that was the only one, but people can feel free to chat anytime.
Okay, so so the snowpack thing is interesting, right? Because the Snotel data tells one story, but then this map that we're looking at kind of looks at the overall watershed, but let's look at an individual ski resort. So next slide. So here's Pajarito. This is also based on some Snotel data, but it's more, it takes a cross, Open Snow has developed a way to do like a cross count to get a more accurate pinpoint on Pajarito, for example. And so we're at 87% of average for this season. So, still pretty good, not the 100 plus that we saw on that map a minute ago. But you can look at this orange line. I mean, look at that. We really bad beginning of the season. Not uncommon, but then we had a late December storm that kind of got us even above normal. And then we flatlined in January, also not uncommon. January doesn't tend to be a real good month. And then we got, we pieced together a few storms, just enough there in late January, early February to get Pajarito open. And then we had these last few storms in March. Next slide. Ski Santa Fe, kind of similar, right? Not that end of December, that holiday storm cycle, allowed them to open the upper mountain, flatlined in January, got a couple nice storms in late January, early February, then a really kind of bad month there before we rebounded a little bit in March. Next slide. Taos, talk about feast or famine. I mean, Taos it will have these like 30-inch storm cycles, and then it'll be dry for 4 weeks, and then a 30-inch storm cycle, and then dry. So you can see this stair step of a season that it's been, but 91% of average, not bad, and fairly consistent with that moderate La Nina. Next slide.
So Julian, a couple people are actually asking where the highest and lowest comes from on these maps.
Yeah, so this is the historical record going back, I'd have to double check, but probably to 1900. And basically we look at, you know, the lowest would be the driest year on record. And then the highest would be the snowiest year on record. And been able to compile that data and form a graph using that. And I'll double check to see what years that goes back to. It might actually be more recent if it's using Snotel data. But 30, 40 plus years to give us a good sense of kind of the average.
Great, thank you.
And then that bolded white line is the kind of, again, the average when you take all of the years and compile them. Okay, so let's, we talked a little bit about La Nina, El Nino. We talked about kind of the snowpack and how we're doing these 2 years. I feel like we've, no pun intended, kind of weathered the storm. I feel like in the northern mountains anyway, we've had decent years, even though it's a double dip La Nina. But we should all, like, you know, in solidarity with the southern mountains, they are not doing well. It is a very grave situation in the southern part of the state. So we have to remember we're all part of one mountain community, and hopefully we'll get a few more southern storms to kind of bump their snowpack up. But it's really, really bad situation. But now let's talk a little bit about a short term. You know, we're at March 22nd, and there's still, you know, March can be our snowiest month, and April can also do really well. So let's take a look at kind of how I would look at a 3-week forecast. Next slide. So what I like to do kind of when I'm looking at the big picture is I look at, and nowadays you can kind of access a lot of this data, you know, sitting at home on our computer. It's kind of amazing how much is accessible now via internet, and with Open Snow, we have access to a dozen different kind of models and weather predictions, and a really handy tool is to look at these kind of height, what we call height anomalies. But basically, it's looking at where is their low pressure, where is their high pressure. Low pressure tends to be associated with storminess. High pressure tends to be associated with dry and warm. High pressure is when air is sinking, and low pressure is when it's rising. And rising air cools, and the air moisture in the air condenses and forms, you know, water droplets. And so when you have rising air, you have storminess usually, and when you have sinking air, you have dry weather. And so when I'm looking out at a, you know, 5 to 20 days, I look at these patterns. Where do I see areas of storminess, and where do I see high pressure? So here's a map for March 24th to the 28th. If we had a map of right now, the 22nd and 23rd, there's actually see that the area of storminess that's over Illinois, and it says storm. That is the storm that's currently hanging around us yesterday and today and causing tornadoes down in Texas and Louisiana. That storm has moved to the east, and from March 24th to the 28th, high pressure is going to build in over the west. And so I look at that, and that tells me a narrative that says, you know, more than likely we're going to have dry and warmer weather in New Mexico, because that ridge of high pressure is literally sitting over us. And if I were to then kind of, you know, go a couple layers deeper into looking at temperature and moisture and different ingredients, we would also see that it lines up with dry weather. But look what's lurking off to the left, you know, up in Alaska and off the coast, the Pacific coast. What do we see lurking over there? Some storminess. Okay, is that going to come our way? Well, it can't come our way between March 24th and the 28th because the high pressure is blocking it. And high pressure is a ridge that blocks anything from coming in. So we need that high pressure to move out. So what's going to happen? Let's go to the next slide. Around March 29th, you still have a little bit of a high pressure ridge off the coast of California, but it looks like what we call a dirty ridge, meaning it's not strong enough to block the storms entirely up to the Pacific Northwest. It looks like a storm might sneak through, kind of slide through in our neck of the woods around March 29th. And so that tells me, okay, that's 7 days away. Anything that's kind of 7 days away is pretty low probability. But that tells me to kind of, we're going to start looking at that time frame as a possible storm. And that's when you can start to look at some extended modeling and see, you know, as we get closer. We also see storminess up again in around Alaska, trying to maybe work its way down, but not able to yet. Next slide. And then look what happens, April 1st to 3rd, that high pressure that was kind of blocking things off the coast of California has moved north. And what that's allowing is the storm energy, the jet stream kind of naturally wants to dive whenever it can. It's kind of the way the Earth, kind of the rotation and kind of the dynamics of the atmosphere, it tends to want to dive if it can. And so when high pressure is not blocking, it likes to form a trough down into the west. So what we see around the April 1st, 3rd time frame is that high pressure moving away and that trough potentially coming down. And so I see good signs here for possibly 2 storms over the next 3 weeks. But that's all we can say right now. People write me or they say, hey, should I go chase powder on April 2nd? And what I say is, you know, I would pencil that in with a very light, loose pencil. And, you know, if there is going to be a storm, it looks like it might be in that time frame. But then we just have to wait and we have to be patient. You have to really get into the 3 to 5 day time frame to have any semblance of confidence. And even then, 3 to 5 days is a lot, can change. But that's kind of the narrative that I see over the next 3 weeks. Dry for the next week, storm around the 29th, 28th, dry for a couple days, and then maybe a bigger storm. This looks more substantial because you have the trough. If we go back up to the previous slide real quick, you can see we don't know, right? March 29th could end up being a great storm, but just when I look at this, what I see is some of the storm energy is trapped up in the Pacific Northwest and a little bit sneaks through, and you still have some high pressure kind of mingling. And so that's a sign that maybe the March 29th storm won't be as strong. Whereas if you go to the next slide, you see the full kind of force of the jet stream potentially will trough down near us. And so that looks really intriguing to me. Next slide. So when we look, when we get closer, when we get into like 3 to 5 day range, what I do every morning when I sit down to write the New Mexico Daily Snow, which I won't do this the next 5 days because we're in a high pressure. But as we get closer to that March 28th, 29th storm, you can just kind of click through this. Great, that's perfect. Yeah, up one. There you go. So what I do, I look at the overall environment and pattern, which is kind of what we just did. I'll look at where that low pressure is centered. And then I look at, these are really all the ingredients that make snow. So what do you need to create snow? First, you need moisture. Second, you need some type of lift in the atmosphere. Remember I mentioned when air rises, it cools, and any precipitation that's any moisture that's in the air as it rises will condense and form droplets. And if it's cold enough, form snowflakes. So you need moisture, you need lift. Again, we need it cold enough to create snow so it doesn't rain. And then we look at how much is it gonna snow. We start to get into the kind of numbers. And when you have a lot of moisture, when you have a lot of lift, and when you have very cold temperatures, when you kind of check each of those 3 boxes, you start to get excited about maybe a powder day or some good, Nordic skiing or whatever your hobby is. And then we want to look at timing, and timing is so critical, not only for chasing powder, but for mountaineering. I mean, if it's gonna snow overnight and you wake up in the morning to a bluebird day, that's very different than if the snow is gonna start at 6 a.m. and go really strong until 4 p.m. or until 1 p.m. and then clear out. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that we all know well that timing is key. And we're really kind of blessed these days that the technology, we have access to a lot of data and different models that help inform each of, tell us moisture, lift, temperature, timing. So what I'm gonna do now is kind of look at this framework, but in the context of our mountains here locally. Because even if you know all of this, every mountain has its own kind of local dynamics in terms of the mountain, the position of the mountain, the aspect of the mountain, the wind direction. And in New Mexico, it's actually very complex. Probably everywhere, but I like to think New Mexico is even more complex. So next slide. So when we think about, let's talk about Pajarito for a minute. Pajarito is really interesting, and I wish I could go back. And if anyone present today knows, I'd love to talk about it in the discussion. I know there's some things written. Why was Pajarito founded where it is now? And I know it moved once from an original location. I know it was started by the scientists up in Los Alamos. But and it's a great mountain. The positioning is awesome. But is it like the ideal spot for snow in the Jemez? Probably not. And it's probably it was built where it is for proximity to Los Alamos and ease to get there. And it's a really fun mountain. But if you look at where it's positioned, it's actually surrounded by mountains. You have the Jemez range to the west, and Pajarito, it sometimes is in what we call the rain shadow of the Jemez. I mean, if you have a storm coming in from the west or the southwest, and it's not super powerful, that air will get blocked. And Jemez actually is in kind of the rain shadow of the Jemez. Not always, but sometimes. And then to the north, you have this massive San Juans, the Tusas Mountains around Chama up to Wolf Creek, the Weminuche Wilderness, where I grew up backpacking, massive ranges to the north. And then you have the Sangre de Cristos to the east. and so Pajarito is actually in a really tricky spot to get snow. And it's kind of why it's you have these seasons where it's like, are they even going to open? And then we get a couple storms and they're able to open. And before you know it, they're at 80% snowpack. But, the Sangres, we'll get into the Sangres in a minute, but let's go to the next slide for Pajarito. One of the most common storm tracks that we see in this part of the country is that trough that I talked about for the April 1 to 3 storm. That jet stream likes to trough down and then dive up. And it's just like a natural kind of evolution of the storm track, typically in the west. And it's why Wolf Creek gets the most snow of any mountain in our region. They get the most snow of anywhere in Colorado, arguably the whole Southwest. And it's because that what I call the four corners special, or that kind of four corners low. You get that low centered around the four corners, and you get the counterclockwise winds that just slam into Wolf Creek. And if you look at the terrain to the south and southwest of Wolf Creek, it's just that flat, if you've driven to Shiprock, we know it's just that flat 5,000, 6,000 foot elevation. And man, when that moisture and air comes across that plateau, and then imagine rising from 5,000 feet, to 13,000 along Wolf Creek Pass. You can just imagine all the cooling, all the condensation, what we call orographic lift, mountain lift, just slams Wolf Creek with snow. And that's why. It's the most common storm track, and they get that orographic lift. Look at Pajarito. you know, the most common winds kind of miss it. If the low is centered around the four corners, you might get some, you know, a side swipe, a kind of glancing blow where we get 3 to 6 inches in Pajarito, but then, like, you know, the San Juans are getting 3 feet. And as the crow flies, we're not that far away. But we can sometimes just miss out on those big storms. We'll talk about Taos in a second. But, you know, I would say the whole Sangres can miss out a little bit as well. And with these four corner storms are tricky to forecast for New Mexico. For what I've done, I've gone back and looked at some of the best storms for Pajarito the last couple of years. And the next few slides, we're going to kind of do a debrief in a way of some storms that did really well and why. So what are the favorable patterns for Pajarito? Not just the Jemez. I'm talking about Pajarito, the ski area. Next slide. So one of the best storms we had last year, it was this low came down into Nevada. It was a really strong, we had really strong upper level winds, winds in the upper atmosphere, like, you know, way above 20,000, 18,000 feet of elevation. And we had a really strong jet stream right over that kind of swath of the Jemez where Pajarito is located. And I made a mental note of this storm because I want to understand for future, like, what are good setups for Pajarito? How can we predict good snow? So we had this really strong low over the Great Basin of Nevada, and then we had a really strong jet stream right over. Next slide. This is the radar taken on January 19th at 7:45 a.m. And if you skied powder on January 19th or January 20th last year, you know the storm. This is a radar, and I think if you click, might be an animation, but no, sorry, just go back up to the next one. So this is a band of snow. If you look at this, you don't see a lot of rotation in this happening, right? Like, you don't see this kind of swirling storm. You just see like a band of precipitation that lined up, and it was directly where that jet stream was cranking. And so you had really strong storm energy. That jet stream, what that jet stream does is it creates lift in the atmosphere. And go back up one more slide, sorry. The other thing that this low, if you look at that low, counterclockwise spin, guess what's right off the coast of California? A ton of water, a ton of moisture. So we had that low bringing in subtropical moisture from the Pacific. We had jet stream energy, so moisture check, lift check. And then we had cold temperatures. It was January 19th, so it's going to be cold. Next slide, you get this beautiful snow band set up. I under forecast the storm, I'm pretty sure, in a big way. And I believe Pajarito got over a foot of snow. This was the storm that kind of allowed us to open last year. And you can see kind of that band just set up perfectly. So this is not a common setup, but this is one setup that I think could do really well for Pajarito, and really anywhere that's under that snow band. Next slide. Another setup that is not common but can do really well is when the low, and I'm sorry, go to the next slide. There we go. What can happen, we saw this a little bit, we haven't seen it too much this year, but last year, we also saw where the storm tracked a little bit to the south of, like, the center of the low is between Ski Santa Fe and say Ski Apache, and you get that counterclockwise flow that's bringing what we say a southeast wind. So wind is always named after the direction it's coming from. So this is a south to southeast wind. And if you think back to that map that we had earlier, you have the Jemez to the west of Pajarito, you have the San Juans to the north, and you have the Sangres to the west, to the east. So you have mountains on the west, north, and east. What does that mean? It means we have a gap in the south and southeast. And so that's probably the most favorable wind for Pajarito. If I had to pick one, it would be a south southeast wind. it rises, it, you know, it kind of goes through that Rio Grande corridor, and then it rises up the mountain, condenses, you have that lift, and then you get snowfall on the leeward side of Pajarito. And we saw a setup like this last year where we had another double-digit storm. So I'm looking at this pattern when I'm forecasting snow for Pajarito. I'm looking at the wind direction, I'm looking at the jet stream. Last week we had a, you know, that kind of bonus 8-inch storm we had last week, which again, I under forecast it. I kind of think sometimes you can get a northeast wind. You know, if you think about where Pajarito is situated, right? Like if you're driving up 285 and you look down back and you can see the Pajarito Mountain, you know, the Pajarito Mountain's facing, the runs are all kind of facing northeast. And while the sangres are there, I have seen a northeast wind kind of come through that gap, and the air kind of goes along again the Rio Grande, and then it rises. So I think occasionally a northeast wind can do okay. Next slide. This is the radar of the storm that when the low was centered in southern New Mexico, and you can see this was from March 24th of 2021. I also remember this storm because I believe I went to Pajarito to get powder. This is March 24th of 2021, double-digit storm. The low is centered in southern New Mexico, and you can see that snow, that wind kind of cranking up from the southeast. So this is that southeast wind that I was talking about. Favorable for Pajarito. Santa Fe can do well too. Next slide. And then this is the last kind of setup that I look for Pajarito to do well, as well as Ski Santa Fe. The most common cold front that we see in New Mexico is actually where cold air slides down the front range, and then it enters the gap, that what I call kind of the I-25 gap, but it can seep through that I-25 corridor where you have the Pecos Wilderness kind of drops off, and then you have a lower valley there. Cold air is dense, it's heavy. So cold air likes to stick against the ground, and you get cold air coming down that Raton Plateau. It goes through the mountain corridor. If it's a really strong cold front, it can go up and over the mountains as well. And so when you have cold air coming in from the east, and then you can have sometimes, you know, at the same time, moisture coming in from the west. And what that does is you have a collision of cold air and moisture that creates a convergence zone. And that surprise 8 inches that we had last week was a convergence setup. And it's almost impossible to predict where that convergence is going to happen. And where that happens, you get a snow band that sets up. And so that's another pattern that I look for that's really hard to predict, but at least we can say, hey, there might be a snow band, a convergence band that sets up. And if that lines up over Pajarito or Ski Santa Fe, we could get what I call kind of an upside surprise. And Pajarito's had 2 of those this year, a kind of convergent snow band. Next slide, please. This is the February 16th, 17th of this year, 2022. That's a convergent snow band that cold air from the east came through, some moisture from the west, and look at that kind of stationary band of snow that's set up. And this was the storm where Paja and Ski Santa Fe did really well, and Taos and others didn't. I believe on this day that snow band favored. We just got lucky, kind of set up over us. These things again are almost impossible to predict. Next slide. So I know a lot of us, you know, love Taos or like to go hike up in the Wheeler Peak Wilderness, maybe backcountry up there. Why is Taos Ski Valley get more snow than any mountain in New Mexico? You know, it isn't Wolf Creek, but it kind of is the sister to Wolf Creek in the sense that Taos Ski Valley is positioned right on that western edge of the Sangres, and it really just like sits up there and really looms over the valley below. And at 12,481 feet summit, Kachina Peak, all really high terrain. And if the predominant kind of storm pattern is from that west-southwest, you can get that orographic lift, and I kind of call it orographic magic at Taos, where you get moisture in from the southwest, you get cold air from the north, southwest winds. Again, it's not a slam dunk the way Wolf Creek is, but they do darn well. And that's why we see these 30-inch storm cycles, 40 inches over 4 days. Kind of snow, we just don't see, Ski Santa Fe and Pajarito don't get 36 inches in 3 days very often. Taos has had it 4 times this year. And it's just because of where they're positioned in relation to the lower elevation to the west, and super high, super steep. I've also seen Taos just do I see Taos convert snow out of really poor ingredients. They just have this way of creating snow, and it's really hard to forecast for Taos because they can overperform a lot. This last storm, just yesterday, I actually don't know how Pajarito did. The webcams only looked like a couple inches, but last week, when Pajarito got 8 inches, Taos only got 4. And the reason that Pajarito outperformed Taos was it was a little more of a southern track, and you also had that kind of lucky, a little bit of a lucky convergent zone. And so in an El Nino year, when you get a more southern track, that's when maybe we see like Pajarito and Ski Santa Fe like outperform Taos more often. But in a La Nina year, if we think back to that slide at the beginning, right, the northern Sangres are just closer to that storm track. And if the storm track is kind of grazing the northern part of the state, well, Taos is perfectly positioned for that, Red River. Cuchara came up on this map. Cuchara is a little yellow dot right above the box that says Taos Ski Valley. Talk about being in not a great spot for snow. Cuchara is literally surrounded by mountains. Any storm from the west or southwest is just not going to make it to Cuchara. It's like big crumbs of every southwest storm. But guess what happens when you have storms like we did last Thursday and yesterday? The storm, southern track, counterclockwise flow with a northeast and an east wind. And if you look on this map, to the right, the east of Alamosa, you're talking about basically the plains off into Kansas. You do have the Spanish Peaks right there. And so Cuchara does really well with a northeast wind because there's nothing blocking it. And then that air just flows right into Cuchara. So they got 12 inches last night and they got 12 inches last week with that setup. So really, every mountain has its own kind of local storm pattern. So next slide. So I think if you want to learn more about open snow, or and Beth, you can just leave this as the last slide, and we'll take questions. But you can with your iPhone or Android camera, just point your camera at that QR code, and you can download the app, and I can answer any questions you have about it. I might actually, Beth, put the open snow up on my screen, and I can kind of walk people through it a little bit. And then this is a great time to take questions.
All right. Yeah, you should still be able to share screen if you want, whenever you want to take that over. Okay, so first question, can you comment on the large temperature excursions in the Arctic and Antarctic, sometimes 30 to 40 degrees C, going on right now?
Gosh, I'm just going to share my screen real quick can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, could you repeat the question? I'm pretty sure I can't comment on it, but give it one more go.
So temperature excursions, I'm guessing off of the norm in the Arctic and Antarctic going on right now, or maybe is that Mark? You can clarify and we can come back.
Yeah. I was going to say I could pull up kind of a, we can pull up, let's see. So this is one of the, this is Weather Bell that I use. Let's just see, let's just pull up. So the surface temperatures, I assume, let's see. So these pinks obviously are super cold air, pinks and blues over the Arctic. Did you say, was the question about both the Arctic and the South Pole, or?
Yeah, it says both.
I mean, yeah, I'm afraid I can't comment other than, let's see. Yeah, if you want to email me, email Beth or me, and I'm going to put my email up on the screen, but I'm happy to like look into it and ask, but I can't comment on that right now.
Okay, yeah, maybe if you just throw your contact information in the chat, we can get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Okay, so the next one, I had the same question too. Sometimes I'll be watching the weather service forecast, and it'll be showing up to a week of completely clear weather, and suddenly there's a storm, within 1 or 2 days. What has gone on when one of these surprise storms happens? Where do the models break down?
Yeah, was there one in particular, one recently that you're referring to? I'm curious.
So I've been out of town for a little while, but Bill, if you have a specific example, you can give us that. But I think actually maybe even that was the storm right before the storm before the 8-inch one. There's one in January. Yeah, Bill says he doesn't know the date of that one, but
okay. Yeah, I mean, I would say it certainly can happen, and it does happen. And I would like, for the most part, the ones that tend to be the surprise storms for me are the convergence ones, where you get the cold air from the east, and there's just enough moisture and energy from the west that you get that snow band that maybe the models missed. As far as like a storm, that is ramping up and tracking, and I mean, man, it's a pretty remarkable, I would say the vast majority of storms we see coming with days notice. But yes, Mother Nature always wins. Mother Nature always prevails, and Mother Nature always has secrets up their sleeve. And so yes, like these surprises happen, but the technology has gotten so much better, just even over the last like 5 years, that more often than not, I can say there will be some chance of snow on this day. Will it be an 8-inch storm or a dusting? Like, that's where the surprises tend to happen. But I would say the general timing, we're pretty darn consistent on. I'm not very consistent on getting the snow totals right, but very consistent on timing. But it's a good question, and yeah, they're fun when they happen over your mountain. That's for sure.
Yeah. So
other questions. Yeah.
So Bill asks if one of these big high temperature ridges, does it unexpectedly collapse and that storminess kind of squeaks through, or is it just that, yeah, it didn't, it was like your first version for the 28th, where it was a light blue.
Yeah, I do remember a storm. I bet maybe it's probably the one you're talking about. I do remember where we were talking about a high pressure ridge for like 10 days. And then I'm like, all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, that high pressure moved out quicker than we thought. And then the storm track came back down. I do remember that happened earlier this year. So we still had, I believe, a 3-4 day advance notice, but I think we went from like, I remember writing, yeah, it looks like it's going to be dry the next 7 to 10 days. Whoa, actually it looks like storm's coming in 3 or 4 days. Yeah, that happens a lot. But as far as like a 12-hour or 24-hour surprise, not so much.
All right. So do you think your predictions are more accurate because you're looking at multiple models and, I guess they mean most of us are usually looking at, say, weather.gov or the Weather Channel.
Yeah. I like to think my forecasts are pretty accurate. I actually do what I call a keep me honest report. I believe in accountability, and people are paying a subscription and they're reading my my New Mexico daily snow. And so I'm just going to scroll back to, I think I did a keep me honest report on the last storm. Yeah, so like here's the March 16th to 17th storm. And this is where, like, this is that 8-inch storm, right? So I had predicted 2 to 5 for Pajarito. And they got 3 more than the high range of my forecast. And so I put this out transparently and publicly. And I don't mind seeing blues. I don't mind seeing a lot of blues. If we get more snow than what I predict, everyone's happy. No one's going to complain unless they like stayed home. And then they're like, oh, it snowed 8 inches. But I think all of the open snow forecasters, like, we just are so passionate about what we do. I'm spending a lot of time looking at models. I'm reading I learn a lot from the National Weather Service, NOAA. I read, my colleague up in Colorado, I'll read his forecast, Arizona, Utah. And so I'm kind of just so passionate about it that I want to get it right. I also love powder and I want to go when there's going to be good snow. And I know the mountains, right? So I know what wind pattern is going to do well for Pajarito, or Angel Fire does really well with a northeast wind because it's on the east side of the Sangres. If you read, the Weather Channel or the Weather Service, oftentimes for good reason, they're more concerned about roads and safety, and they're not thinking from the skier standpoint. National Weather Service will say, winter storm warning in the southern Sangres and the Jemez, but they're not getting down to the granular of what that means for where we go skiing or hiking or whatever. So I think that's the added detail that I provide. But I do miss, I would say more often than not, I under forecast storms, especially Taos this year. I had Taos outperform my forecast by 18 inches on a storm cycle. I like to be a little more conservative. If I'm confident that there's going to be double digits, I'll say double digits. But if I'm not confident, I'll probably say 4 to 8 inches. And if it snows 12, great, but my whole thing is really about timing. And I think timing is the biggest gift that we can give people. If we say it's going to snow overnight Tuesday, and there's a chance of soft turns or fresh powder on Wednesday morning, what I preach is go skiing or go whatever your mountain activity that you love snow, go on Wednesday morning. Worst case scenario, if the storm busts, you're still going to be really happy to be out in the mountains. I mean, and if you took a day off work it's a privilege to be able to maybe go skiing on a Wednesday morning. And sometimes we make real sacrifices to go. And if I miss the storm, then yeah, that's why I want accountability. But I always say go when we think the storm's going to be there. And that way, if it overperforms, you're there to have fun. And so that's what I think I do a really good job of, is the timing.
Okay, so there's just one more that I see, but if anybody has any others, just keep putting them in. So your forecast that you showed was about 10 days out. I guess that's the one that you said goes to April 1st or so. Is that where you draw a hard line and you stop forecasting, or yeah, I guess that's 10 days.
Yeah, no, definitely not. In fact, I mean, let's look at, so I'm just going to pull up. So if you look on here, these are the global deterministic is like one single model run. And then the global ensemble is like 20 to 50 runs that take an average. So when I'm looking out past 10 days, I'd always look at the ensemble, which is the median or average of 20, 30, 40, 50 model runs. So it's higher probability. And we can go out a couple weeks. Let's see. This is the upper heights that I was telling you about. So here's the storm that's here now. That's kind of over, it's centered now over Texas, Oklahoma, causing the tornadoes tonight down in Louisiana. And then we can go forward in time. So here's the high pressure ridge that we were talking about. And then here's that March 28th, 29th storm. Now, if I see the ensemble, this gives me even greater confidence, that there's some storminess is going to be in our region around March 29th. Probably on the weaker side, but there's going to be something there. And then we see this April 1st, 2nd, again, some storminess, but on the ensemble, not a really strong signal. Let's look at the individual model run. And look at that, see? And this is why when you're looking at 10 days out, 15, 20 days out, here's one single model run showing a really potent storm over the four corners. And if you look at the ensemble of the average of 30 runs, it's a weaker, it's not a slam dunk. Let's go out a little further. It looks like what we could be seeing in early April is where the storm track sets up nicely over the west and hangs around. We could see multiple, what I see here is no high pressure blocking. And potentially some activity in our region the first week of April. The reason I don't look too far out beyond that is just that the accuracy is so low. You can even do these long range forecasts. You can get into like mid-April, May, but I just don't even really play with that. If we're in a really long dry streak, like let's say it hasn't snowed for 3 weeks and I want to give readers some glimmer of hope, I'll look at the extended. And then when we're in the 3 to 5 day range, you look at these short-term forecasts. So, the global deterministic is for 1 to 3 days, and when we're looking out beyond 3 to 5 days, we're looking at more on the ensembles just for higher probability. But this is what's happening right now down in the strong thunderstorms down in Louisiana and Alabama, Mississippi, happening right now. And so that's like the short term, 1 day. So I think that answered. But I'm hopeful for that first week of April. I think we could be real quick on open. Any other questions, Beth? Otherwise, I'll just quickly show what OpenSNOW site.
That is the last of the questions from the chat. If I missed anything, please chat at me, or if you have any questions coming in, let me know.
So just in the last sec, so this is the OpenSNOW website. It looks similar on your phone, but I have all my favorites up here. I've got Cuchara, Mount Taylor, Cloudcroft, Wolf Creek, Arapahoe Basin, because I used to ski there a lot. Ski Santa Fe, Taos, Red River, Angel Fire. If we click on Pajarito, you can see we might get a couple inches tonight. And I can scroll down and look at, so like this is 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. We might get 1 to 3 inches. I think in my daily snow, I predicted, this was I went to Ski Santa Fe yesterday. So I have 3 to 7 for Pajarito from Monday night through tonight. So it looked like maybe a couple inches last night on the webcam this morning, and then another couple inches tonight. But you can also, the OpenSnow has their own prediction models, and you can look at it for any mountain. So let's just see, like for Taos, they're not favored for tonight because of this. Actually, it's kind of a northeast coming down wind tonight. And then look at this. Remember we said, March 29th, 30th. And so the nice thing about being a subscriber of OpenSnow is you can get a 6 to 10 day forecast. And I'm like, interesting. Okay. We saw it on the maps, and yeah, okay, scroll down. 3 to 5 inches Tuesday morning, 3 to 7 Tuesday night. And then I look over here, 45-mile-an-hour winds, wind warning for mountaineering, super important. Let's say I want to look at the map function. So this is our rate. This is the radar right now. This is real-time radar. And I see, I don't know, for those of you in Los Alamos, it's snowing there right now. I show, radar dropping down into the Jemez. We also have predictive radar. So this is forecasting the radar 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and then that system moves out. So the 2 to 3 inches that are forecast tonight are from this little band that's coming through right now. And this is a north wind. That's pretty good for Pajarito and for Santa Fe. So again, if you love mountaineering and you like weather, this is a great app. In the summer, you can do a smoke index, which unfortunately, now more than ever is really useful in the summer. So yeah, play around with it, check it out. I'm happy to answer any questions. And my email is julian@opensnow.com. And I'll just put it up here on the screen right here.
And Julian, we have one report from Los Alamos that says it's not snowing.
Okay. How about, yeah, probably one's up in the mountain, but yeah, hopefully up in the mountain it's snowing.
And Rick says it's a great talk and a great service. He's a user and appreciates all of your work. All right.
Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to get involved with Kuchara more, email me. I think I'm going to start volunteering for them. They have a nonprofit. They're trying to reboot the mountain. And my goal is to get some of the New Mexico resort to kind of maybe collaborate with them, because they're part of the Sangres and they're kind of part of our mountain family. But they just need like basic things like snow guns and a truck, and they're trying to raise 60 to 80,000 to get the beginner lift running next year. So if anyone loves Kuchara and wants to get involved, let me know.
Julian, why don't we put your email address in the chat here? It's Julian at opensnow.org. Okay.
Yeah,
Julien Selby.
Mm-hmm. So. And I'm also fine to receive phone calls. I'll put my phone number in there as well.
Oh, great. Gosh, I keep forgetting you're a co-host. You can chat to everyone. Perfect. All right. Well, if that's all the questions, I so appreciate everyone's patience with the technical difficulties. We did practice, I promise. No, we did everything we could. I'm glad we got the information to everybody eventually. And if that's all the questions, Julian, I just want to say thank you so much again for sharing this. This is great information. Really, really, you're just so knowledgeable about the weather, and I'm jealous how much you can predict out here. I'm used to Eastern weather where it just comes across and nothing changes because there's no mountains. But yeah, moved out here and can't predict anything. So yeah, if anyone wants to join us again, our usual astronomy talks are on Friday evenings. Some of our talks are actually moving to in person again. and maybe even the Mountaineers here in the next couple of months. So definitely check our website. Go to peaknature.org for more information and to register for all of those. And thanks everyone again for tuning in tonight. Julian, there's lots more people chatting. Thank you. Really interesting. Excellent talk. So
No, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks Beth for taking over the slide control. Appreciate it.
no problem. Anytime.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you hopefully in the mountains.